Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show, joined here by a shaman musician and a healer in his own right in many ways, David Dawg Grisman. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Nice to be here with you, Jake.
I want to be clear about this. Your first, as a recorder, as somebody who recorded music and actually produced an album, was 1963. This was Frank Wakefield?
And Red Allen.
And Red Allen.
Or actually Red Allen, Frank Wakefield, and the Kentuckians.
Q Studios. Can you just break down, like you were not...
Folkways,
yeah.
FA 2408.
How did it come about? And why were you so passionate? I guess here what I'm trying to say is this. You were in a really prolific jug band. You didn't have to leave New York City to see great music. You went...
Well, yeah, I was interested in bluegrass music. And
obsessed.
And you really had to leave New York City to hear bluegrass music in 1960, 61, 62. So I made a lot of pilgrimages down to Baltimore, Washington area, Virginia. Now there were bluegrass shows in Sunset Park and West Grove, Pennsylvania, and New River Ranch in Rising Sun, Maryland. Yeah, the first bluegrass show like that I saw, Ralph Rensler called me up one morning. He was my neighbor, friend, mentor.
He's looking down right now. He's smiling, man.
And he called me up one Sunday morning, August of 1961, and said, "Hey, I'm going down to Maryland to hear Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys who want to come." So obviously I went. And
Wakefield blew your mind.
Well, Wakefield, yeah.
And actually, that was the best thing that could have happened to you because you thought everybody played.
I went to hear Bill Monroe, and Frank Wakefield was in the opening. You know, there were one or two other bands, and Frank Wakefield was the mandolin player in a band called Frankie Short, Marvin Howell, and the Franklin County Boys. And I never heard of Frank Wakefield or much else, but and then he and Bill Monroe played duets backstage, and that sort of really blew my mind. But yeah, I did get the mistaken impression that because Frank Wakefield in 1961 sounded about as close to Bill Monroe as anybody could. I got the mistaken idea that they all sounded like that.
I was driving over here today from Los Angeles, and I was thinking to myself, John Sebastian was on the Chitlin circuit for a minute, the Black Chitlin circuit.
Yeah, right.
And I'm thinking like Jethro, Burns, Vassar, Wake. Was that the white Chitlin circuit? I mean, was there a white sort of hip circuit? Not, Grand Ole Opry was the centerpiece, but I'm trying to get at the idea.
I really came into it through folk music, the folk music scare of the early 60s,
Yeah.
And
I dig.
So there wasn't really a circuit. There was I was part of a group of young, kind of urban misfit teenagers who didn't particularly like Leslie Gore or what was happening to pop music or rock and roll in the late 50s, early 60s, because there was all this really cool music that happened in the mid 50s, with Chuck Berry and Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis and Frankie Lyman. There's just so much cool music.
It was burning.
Used to listen to the top 50. I'd come home from school and they'd play for 3 hours the top 50 records, and I mean before you even got to 15, you'd hear all kinds of great stuff. Of course, it probably got a little worse once you got near the top, but and then all of a sudden that music, Buddy Holly, it kind of evaporated for various reasons. Elvis went in the army. Chuck Berry went to jail.
Little Richard found God.
Yeah, exactly. And Buddy Holly got killed.
Right.
And all of a sudden Frankie Lyman OD'd.
Wow.
And it was pretty
vapid,
in around that time. But the Kingston Trio caught my ear with Tom Dooley and the 5-string banjo, and then I discovered Pete Seeger. Went to see Pete Seeger at Carnegie Hall in 1959. I met a couple of friends in high school, junior high school, that were into this folk music, and there was that FM radio at my friend Jack Scott's house, and a guy named Oscar Brand had a weekly show with a band called the Shanty Boys, which included a 5-string banjo player named Roger Sprung, who played 3-finger Scruggs style. And Jack Scott kept telling us about this kind of music called bluegrass. And one day we used to go into New York City, the number 30 bus, and we go to Sam Goody's record store, and you could find Folkways records there and all kinds of things you couldn't get in Passaic, New Jersey. And he came home with a record called Mountain Music Bluegrass Style. And he called Fred Weiss and myself, the other two friends. We had to go over and hear this. And he had already picked out the first track he was going to play, which wasn't the first track in the album, but he put the needle down on White House Blues by Earl Taylor and the Stony Mountain Boys. And that changed my life.
Going back to the Wakefield and Red Allen session. I think Red was like, "Yo, we got 10 tunes," and you're like, "We need." Well,
no. What happened was,
I guess really what I want you to talk about is the tunes that you added that wound up either getting it or like. How did you do that as a bird? It was maiden voyage for you.
Well, I thought Frank Wakefield was writing some very interesting mandolin instrumentals, like New Camptown Races, and he had one called Catnip, and I thought it was important to include some of that on this album. I mean, Red Allen had sold Mo Ash a tape of 10 songs, and Folkways Records around that time had like 27 songs.
Absolutely.
So from that standpoint, I didn't think they had enough to. I thought, Folkways adherents are going to complain if they get this album and it's got 10 songs on it.
A measly 10 songs.
Yeah, so anyhow, about half that material that was not traditional. I always liked the part of bluegrass that was derived from older music, and as opposed to like bluegrass arrangements of popular country music of the time. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But
no, I dig.
So I suggested, Peter Siegel and I, my friend Peter Siegel, we had made a pilgrimage down to that area. We heard about this band, Red Allen and Frank Wakefield, and I just knew that Frank Wakefield was a great mandolin player, and I took the Trailways bus down there with my mandolin and my Wallensack tape machine and walked into this bar that was probably about the size of this dressing room. As soon as I walked in, there was Frank Wakefield and Red Allen sitting at a table. It was like out of a movie, They were on a break. And I, just went up to them and introduced myself. Said I was here to take you boys to Carnegie Hall, And
you went home with Wake that night.
Yeah, I was a crazy teenager, just,
And then you recorded some stuff when his baby was screaming in the next day?
Yeah, well, Peter Siegel came down a day or two later, and Red Allen invited us, or I guess we went over to Frank's house. We asked if we could make a tape of those guys singing traditional material.
Very cool.
Agreed to do that in Frank's kitchen. And we just had a Wallensack tape machine and a Electro Voice microphone and recorded about, 30 songs in one sitting. And, that became my Bible, sort of. I learned every mandolin solo. But then we were in a position, I was working part-time. I was a student at NYU, and I had part-time employment working for Israel G. Young, who ran an establishment on McDougal Street called the Folklore Center. And every year there was a hootenanny at Carnegie Hall concert where they have a bunch of different, often obscure folk acts. You know, they'd have a couple of mainstream.
Obscure meaning like not local and from more
like
narrow.
I don't know. You'd have to.
Getting really obscure now. I mean,
there'd be people like Dave Van Ronk and actually we had formed this Even Doesn't Joke band, and we were invited, and I suggested Red Allen and Frank Wakefield, their bluegrass band. And so I actually got them a gig at Carnegie Hall, and then it was a Sunday night, and after the concert, I got them an audition at Gertie's Folk City. After they played Carnegie Hall, they drove down to the village and played a set at Gertie's Folk City and got a 2-week gig. And when they came up to play that gig, they staying at my mom's house in New Jersey, and that was when Red Allen played me this tape that he had made a deal for. So I suggested they had material. He says, well, you talk to Mr. Ash. And I just called up Mo Ash out of the blue. He didn't know me from Adam, and he...
Really?
Yeah.
He gave you Q Studios on a Sunday night, you know?
He gave us a budget for 3 hours at Q Studios in New York, in Manhattan somewhere. And Peter Siegel and I... if you want to know what a producer does, the session was for something like 7 or 8 p.m. and around 1 in the afternoon, I decided to call these guys and make sure they were heading up to New York City. And what are you doing? They were watching the Redskins football game, So I said, you got to get up here and do this session. So
let me.
And then I got Bill Keith, my friend Bill Keith, to play banjo. And that was he was.
Already with Monroe at that point.
That was before he was with Bill Monroe. Well, no, let's see. No, it was 63. It was while he was with Bill Monroe. But he had played with Red before that, and we were friends, and I thought he'd be great to play these Frank Wakefield instrumentals. And my friend Fred Weiss played bass. He was a good bass player.
2 days ago, I did this exact same thing with Pete Sears, and I find it really interesting that was the session that you and Jerry reconnected on.
That's true.
And
although we didn't, it was overdubs.
Sure, really, but I want you to. Yeah. This is really important because whatever was done back with Old and in the Way and that kind of stuff, I just want you to talk about how meaningful that was for you to reconnect. Because of not just being treated with respect and being treated fairly by Jerry, but then the fact that he basically made it as an excuse for you guys to play music again.
Well, no, that wasn't. No, that was just, that came a little later.
Okay.
Yeah. It was just good to, I mean, hey, I had built up some, it's just water over the bridge, Jerry and I hadn't talked to each other in, I don't know what year that was, do you?
The Sears record was like 90, 91, but I mean, it probably was around 89, 90.
Yeah, it was 89, or, we hadn't, I don't think we spoke to each other for about 12 or 13 years. It just wasn't any overt hostility or anything, it's just he was in his world and I was in mine. Unfortunately, as producer of what I was told was the biggest selling bluegrass record of all time up until then, I hadn't gotten a dime except some initial money, and these guys were selling out Madison Square Garden, and I was driving around in a '64 broken down Chevy.
Mm-hmm. And the movie,
that was cool. They were just like any other rip-off record company, But I thought,
and you moved on. I mean, you just kept burning your own path.
I was doing my thing, he was doing his, and it was kind of weird because we were pretty good friends, and I just hadn't heard from him, and I think I had written him a letter at one point, which I don't know. I think he was in kind of a, I can't say, it just wasn't there, and he wasn't where, but yeah, we ran into each other and had a good talk. And
but one day you went to the mailbox. And,
yeah. Well, I've told you all this already.
I guess I just would like you to talk about
how
meaningful that was for you.
Well, it's all great. I mean, Jerry and I got together, and it was meaningful in a professional way because it gave my career a big boost. But in a personal way, it was very good to have become friends again.
Because like Peter Rowan called the Grateful Dead the phantom ship. Every time they needed the money, they'd come back off the coast. And the point is that Jerry was in a democracy. He couldn't.
Well, Jerry was doing what he. He was a complicated man.
I'm just glad Pete Sears made the record so you guys could reconnect. And the music to me, my generation.
I mean, he was. He recommended that I get a grant or an award for the Grateful Dead.
The Rex Foundation.
Yeah, and I called him up to thank him, and we made a date to get together to play. And he walked in and said, we should make a record because it'll give us an excuse to get together. So, great. I just built a studio in my basement, pal. Come on down. And it was a great time, and I'm glad we made that connection.
How do you? What gets you off the most on the bandstand today? I mean, you asked, will there be people coming to both sets? And to me, like we kind of, it's not genre specific. It's all music, like Duke said. But I feel like we're on a formula trip today. More so than ever, especially in.
Well, I like to be in a relaxed. I like really working on music rather than putting it on display.
Can you go deep? Can you go deeper?
But that being said, this is the way we earn our living, and so I like it. I just like it when the music is good and the audience likes it, which they usually do anyway. But I just like. If it's this band, it's, you're always striving for that, it's like you're in search of the miraculous, to quote Gurdjieff, or Ouspensky, I guess that's.
It's out of my bag, but I mean that.
Yeah,
so
the kind of music, you're just looking. It's an elusive search for some kind of perfection, and beyond that, music is a deep form of communication, and I enjoy writing tunes and hearing them develop, and I'm trying to stay in the game. I'm getting old, and a lot of this is kind of physical. But basically, I like playing in the living room or the hotel. I like just working on stuff, but I also like an audience. I enjoy playing just with you there, getting off
I was getting way on.
In a way, was better than audio. You can't really see how much any individual member of the audience might be enjoying it or receiving it. It's obviously. A performance or an exchange of, it's. I mean, you mentioned you like to outlaw applause, but that's kind of. I mean.
Well, no. This is the thing we've been taught.
I don't like mindless applause, but I like appreciation. But I mean, we're
to me, music is this better than anybody. It's vibrational. So I don't know why we've been trained as a culture to sit and applaud as opposed to let the body dance.
I don't think we've been trained. I think I think the listeners want to I think they want to express something back. I don't think it's. I mean, who trains? Yeah, maybe certain aspects. I don't know. I never thought about that.
Power of Power is playing here in 2 weeks. That's a sit-down band. That's a dance band. So
I mean, in different places, you know, like in Japan, they don't hoop and holler. You know.
I don't get around that. I can only. I'm you know, like, yeah. I guess the idea is. Final thought, and then I'll let you bounce. It's always good to talk with you.
Yeah. No, I'm just more into like what's happening.
No,
now,
you're absorbed
you
in
know?
you're delivering.
I mean, like, you know, I love Jerry. I don't really, never was into the Grateful Dead too much. People come up to me in the airport and say, "Oh, I'm a big Deadhead," and I say, "I'm sorry."
But I want you. I want you to. Next time that happens, I want you to think about something. I just turned 40, so my generation, the Grateful Dead in the 1990s was not an appealing. I never saw him once, but it was not Jerry. What the best music he made was with you in that decade. So the Dead was still going on at that time, but it was really not that was. To me, the music you guys made was about love, and that's really my final question to you. Is
well, it was an appreciation. I mean, we just were playing stuff that we always enjoyed hearing. You know, we didn't really write anything new. We revisited or visited all these areas that had been part of our musical upbringing, or you know, all the stuff we dug about music when we were learning to play. That was our common repertoire. You know, those areas, bluegrass. Very traditional music, the New Lost City Rollers, A.L. Lloyd and Ewan McCall. I mean, we were into some similarly obscure, you know, we both had a lot of the same obscure records, like Sea Shanties by A.L. Lloyd.
I'm going to go dig for that now.
Yeah, there were two of them that I had. One was called Blow Boys Blow, and the other one was Thar She Blows. And actually, Ralph Rinsler played mandolin on The Handsome Cabin Boy. No, it's great stuff, and you know, usually we'd have.
But it's like you're like, I'm not part of the Grateful Dead. You know, it's kind of.
I'm not saying.
It's a Garcia Grisman bond. You know,
good. Well,
that's how I look at it. I'm just saying it was. That was the closest we got to touch an Inspired.
No, it's probably I owe my career to Jerry, probably because he was popular, real popular. He didn't really understand it either. And he didn't really.
That was the most beautiful thing about it.
He didn't really want it necessarily, you know. And he was, like you say, a very democratic guy. That band was, you know, democratic to a fault. I mean, but it was like a family, and I realized it was a cultural experience for people. I mean, they took LSD and looked up, and there were the Grateful Dead. It's pretty tight.
How do you? I just want you to talk to Katz about focusing less on chops and more on feel, and at a point in your career, I'm even talking like I know you. I mean, the alto saxophone. I mean, you bought one of those, and I'm just trying to figure out if you could talk about a time in your career when it really you became enlightened to the fact that it was all about feel.
Well, it's funny. I mean, chops. I don't really. I have limited chops. Let's say I have certain strengths and certain weaknesses, and I mean, if some musicians don't seem to have weaknesses, but I'm not one of the, you know, I practice my chops. I mean, musical, composing, just, you know, difficult passages. I think it's important to, especially now at this age, to, you know, keep working on that. But that's what you have to hopefully express something
when you practice
that has some kind of meaning.
Absolutely, and part of that is not repeating any ideas in any sequence. I mean, do you work? I mean, it just flows out of you. It's kind of like you're kind of like a conduit.
You can recognize me. You know, it's just like improvisation. I always had kind of a quarrel with the idea of improvisation because, music's a language, and we learn to speak that language. We learn the language, and then we speak in it, and it's just like everybody. It's like we're improvising now. You don't have a list. Well, maybe you do, but
it's a sketch.
Having
a sketch
conversation. We could start talking about chili rellenos if we want.
I'm hungry. Yeah, sounds good.
But still, you could tell Earl Scruggs from Eddie Peabody, and you can tell Charlie Parker from. Lawrence Welk.
Yep.
Or John Coltrane from Ben Webster. I mean, if you get into it a little bit, and you can tell Willie Nelson from Ralph Stanley, and
And your individuality comes out with your heart, when you begin to really feel.
What I'm saying is, I'm not really pulling ideas out of thin air. I have developed a certain vocabulary, and now I'm speaking in it. And it's just like anybody. It's like, the kind of, classical music, is written out, by and large every note, but there's still a lot of room for interpretation. But at least, the notes, the orchestration, whatever is, a lot of it is accounted for. Whereas the kind of music I've been playing is like parts of it are composed and parts of it are kind of open. But the open parts, to me, it's all composition. If somebody's playing a solo, they're going to compose something to play, either relative to this melody or that chord progression or something, but they've done it before.
Right.
They've used this phrase, that note, this lick, that voicing. They've used it 1,000 times before. You listen to Bill Evans, and it's still Bill Evans. It's not Art Tatum. So, and everybody has to, to just be articulate on a musical instrument requires a certain amount of study or talent or knowledge, or so that you have to have.
And you have to have a conversation. I think that's what I'm looking forward to most tonight is just.
So you have to know to pronounce your words correctly if you're going to say something. It's like you have to make those notes come out in the proper sequence and at the proper time. There's a million things to consider, but a lot of it is chops. And chops of just changing your strings and tuning your axe. And
what were the strings you bought after you got the lesson in Evansville? Black
Diamond, yeah.
Who gave you that lesson?
Jethro Burns, yeah.
Now, okay, the two albums, I want people to listen to this. The two albums, one's about Not for Squares, and then there's another one.
It ain't necessarily square.
It ain't necessarily square. And you're talking, those are the jazziest.
Well, and the other one is.
I should know it too. Straight Ahead.
Playing It Straight.
Playing It Straight. It's all jazz standards, right?
Yeah. There are two of them, yeah.
Is there anyone else that had the jazz inflection? I know he was.
Well, Tiny Moore. There's a guy named Paul Buskirk.
Oh boy, going deep into the well right now.
He's from Texas, yeah.
Jazz inflected.
But Jethro was probably the most prolific and exposed, even though they were a comedy team. That's why they call that Playing It Straight. They're playing jazz. You don't normally think of jazz as being straight, but relative to doing parodies of popular songs. We're the boys from Camp Cucamonga. It was hard to make a living as a pure mandolin player. you know. Even Bill Monroe, he was a singer, song, you know. And you still, you have to do other things.
They want to do for colors.
Right.
In the studio.
Right. Yeah.
Dawg, thank you, man, for spending time.
Hey,
It's always
Jake,
good to
it's
see
a
you,
pleasure.
man. Love
Keep
always.
up the good work. I'm not going to tell you how to do your craft, man. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself.
Dave Weckl, if you're listening
just
in.
remember, you make your own rules and then you break your own rules.
Love always, everybody.
Okay.
All right. Have a good gig. Peace.